Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the massive, unseen iceberg of workplace safety. You might naturally associate safety with hard hats, band-aids, and those classic warning posters in the break room, but today we're going to look way below the surface at the complex, strategic reality of modern workplace management. Prepare yourself, because the reality is pretty shocking. Okay, let's dive into this with a truly staggering number: 54 million. It's a massive figure, right? But what does it actually represent in the real world? Well, that 54 million represents the cumulative hours that U.S. safety managers spend annually completing just one single OSHA data sheet. Literally, think about that for a second. That is over 6,000 years of combined human labor every single year just for one piece of administrative paperwork. It turns out workplace safety is a massive, highly complex administrative undertaking. And this really sets the stage for our journey today as we go way below the surface of basic first aid. Section 1. The Modern Safety Manager. From hall monitor to high-level strategist. This role has completely transformed over the decades. Back in the pre-OSHA era, occupational health usually fell to the plant nurse. And, their job was largely reactive, patching up injuries with first aid right after the fact. They had almost no authority to change company policy or actually prevent those accidents from happening in the first place. But then came the landmark 1970 OSHA Act, which ushered in a whole new era of mandatory federal standards and very strict enforcement. This completely flipped the script. Today, the modern safety and health manager is a high-level executive strategist. We're talking about handling complex system safety, advanced engineering, and even capital investment planning. They interact with literally everyone, from the purchasing department all the way to federal compliance officers. Section 2, Safety versus Health. The acute versus the chronic. People often use the terms safety and health interchangeably, right? But they actually define two completely different risk categories in the workplace. Safety deals with the acute effects of hazards. This means a sudden, severe reaction to a dangerous condition. Think of a massive crane suddenly dropping its load on a construction site, or a worker getting a hand caught in an unshielded machine. It's a sudden, highly visible event that happens right above the surface, and the damage is terrifyingly immediate. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how health, on the other hand, deals with chronic effects. These hazards cause long-term deterioration due to prolonged exposure to a much milder condition, like continuous 90-decibel noise on a factory floor, or slowly breathing in microscopic airborne toxins over the years. These are the invisible hazards lurking beneath the surface. They're so much harder to diagnose because the symptoms often mimic common, everyday illnesses. Really, health hazards are the dangerous, unseen ice of our iceberg. Section 3, the hazard reality check. We can't eliminate everything. You see, it's actually a naive assumption that a safety program must completely eliminate all hazards. True management requires strategic discrimination. And this brilliantly illustrates two types of impossible fixes. On the physical side, we have situations like the 2009 LaGuardia incident where birds disabled those jet engines. With current jet engine mechanics, it's literally impossible to completely prevent all bird strikes. Then, on the economic side, think about building massive elevated walkways and gates over every single university campus crosswalk to prevent pedestrian accidents. Sure, it's physically possible, but the astronomical cost makes it economically impossible to do that for every single minor intersection. Therefore, the true objective of a top-tier safety manager is to eliminate unreasonable hazards, not all hazards. If a manager reacts to every single minor do-good suggestion, like, say, putting up a warning sign for a puddle that occasionally forms after a rainstorm, they can dangerously distract themselves and their team from severe, life-threatening threats. You definitely don't want to be focused on cleaning the restrooms more frequently while completely ignoring an ungrounded electrical drill or dangerous respiratory toxins. It's all about strategic prioritization. Section 4, the record-keeping maze, tracking the data. Remember that crazy 54 million hour figure from the beginning? Well, here is where a lot of that time goes. The government requires complex statistical tracking to monitor workplace safety. It's a real alphabet soup of benchmarks. For years, OSHA relied on the LWDI, or Lost Workday Cases Incidents, to track injury cases involving lost workdays. But catch this, it entirely excluded illnesses. Because of that huge blind spot, newer benchmarks like DART, which stands for Days Away, Restricted, or Transferred, have largely replaced the LWDI. DART gives us a much more accurate picture because it accounts for both injuries and illnesses, plus cases where a worker had to transfer to another job due to a hazard. We also have DAF-DWE, which strictly counts cases involving actual days away from work. Now, when you look at these incidence weights, you'll often see them calculated using a standard base multiplier of 200,000. So why that specific number? Well, it simply represents the math behind a standard workforce. If you have exactly 100 employees working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year, that equals exactly 200,000 hours. Using this standard multiplier normalizes the incidence rates, which allows OSHA to fairly compare the safety records across completely different company sizes. It levels the playing field. Let's consider the paperwork reality for a second. Just look at this actual OSHA Form 300 log. This really shows how abstract, unseen health concepts, like an employee slowly developing repetitive motion carpal tunnel syndrome, translate into mandatory, highly labor-intensive paperwork. Every single recordable incident must be meticulously logged and then categorized by whether it's an injury, a skin disorder, a respiratory condition, or a poisoning. It requires absolute precision, and honestly, the failure to maintain this log properly can result in massive fines, taking up those millions of administrative hours we talked about. Section 5. The economics of accidents. The bottom line. Now we're getting into the deepest part of the iceberg metaphor. The financial impact of documented accidents is absolutely staggering, costing over $164 billion annually. And that's a direct hit to a company's profitability. Historically, workers' compensation premiums hovered around just 1 to 5% of payroll. But recently, in some high-risk sectors, premiums have skyrocketed to 20 or even 30% of total payroll. These direct insurance costs eat straight into corporate profit margins. So, the crucial point is, these massive, highly visible insurance costs are literally just a tiny fraction of the total economic devastation caused by workplace hazards. They really are just the tip of the iceberg. What's actually sinking the ship are these massive, hidden costs. Think about it. When an accident happens, you aren't just paying medical bills. You're paying wages for uninjured coworkers who have to stop what they're doing to assist or who simply lose time during the emergency. You face the cost of damaged equipment and entirely ruined product. Then there's the extra cost of overtime work necessitated to catch up on all that halted production. Add to that the severe learning curve inefficiency of bringing in temporary or replacement workers, and the massive clerical and administrative tracking costs we discussed earlier. These indirect costs silently and aggressively destroy profitability. It just goes to show that high-level safety management isn't just about following the rules. It is an absolute economic imperative. Which brings us to a final, very serious question. If direct costs like medical bills and insurance are just the tip of the iceberg, what hidden costs are sinking your workplace today? I'd encourage you to look beneath the surface of your own organization's operations. The hazards you can't easily see might just be the ones costing you everything. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it completely changes the way you look at the unseen, fascinating world of workplace safety.